Good afternoon, I'm Herman Green with the Midday News. A special welcome if you're watching online at onespotmedia.com. All eyes will be on Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke this afternoon as he seeks to highlight how he plans to finance the country's $803 billion budget. But while looking forward, some commentators and organizations expect that Dr. Clarke will not announce any new taxes. They say with the revenues remaining ahead of target, there is no need for new tax measures to finance the budget for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Financial commentator Orville Johnson pointed out that inflows in the government's coffers between April last year and January this year were $5 billion higher than projection.
About 9.5% higher than the same time last year, which is much higher than the inflation rate. So also I've observed from the figures that the revenues, the fiscal revenues are ahead of the expenditure. So I am anticipating that there will be no new taxes this year as the situation was last year.
The private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, says it is expecting the finance minister to announce a restructuring of the existing tax program to make it more efficient. PSOJ President Howard Mitchell agrees that, based on economic indicators, there would not be a need for new taxes.
We have surpluses in our tax collection. We are on target with the IMF program. Our growth position, although not where it should be, is proceeding. I couldn't see a reason why we would get any new taxes.
Political ombudsman Donna Parchment Brown says she will be meeting this week with representatives of the Tourism Enhancement Fund, which is supervising the debushing program in Portland Eastern. Mrs. Parchment Brown says she will also be reviewing documentation on the program as part of her investigation into an allegation from the People's National Party that state funds are being used to carry out the work. The government has denied the allegation. Speaking on RJR's talk show program Hotline this morning, the political ombudsman said she raised the matter with Prime Minister Andrew Holness. She says in a follow-up email, JLP General Secretary Dr. Horace Chang indicated that, as far as he was aware, state funds were not being used. Mrs. Ombudsman outlined the objectives of her investigation.
To speak to that government agency and also to take a look at the works to make some determination as to whether, in fact, these are truly public works or just a kind donation from a candidate. And in looking at a kind donation from a candidate, yes, one would also have to look at, are these works being done to influence a political outcome?
Yes, there could be anything else.
And therefore, what needs to be done in relation to that?
The Insurance Association of Jamaica, IAJ, is again raising concern about the high number of uninsured properties in Jamaica. The entity is bemoaning the practice, noting that it's not only dangerous for property owners, but for the country's economy as well.
Fire, flood, and though not as frequent, earthquakes are just some of the disasters that threaten property owners and occupants. With the fire department reporting close to 3 times more fires in 2018 compared to 2017, President of the Insurance Association of Jamaica and Managing Director of BCIC, Peter Levy, says underinsurance is a major concern. Property insurance is not mandatory by law, and so he says there is no registry to give an exact number.
I would hazard a guess that a majority are not insured. So it's a significant kind of risk.
Mr. Levy explains that while all mortgaged properties are insured as a requirement of the financing institution, once the mortgage is paid off, most persons choose not to insure as a cost-cutting strategy. The Atlantic hurricane season lasts for 6 months, June to November each year, and presents the greatest recurring risk to property. Mr. Levy says that risk widens with the magnitude of the natural disaster to impact the economy.
If Jamaica has a devastating catastrophe, the money to repair all of those hundreds and thousands of buildings is going to have to come from the owners rather than from a pool of insurance, as it otherwise would. So that would actually set back the recovery from an event.
The past few years have seen some major damage in other countries in the region. with some insurance companies filing bankruptcy as they were unable to finance the wide scale of recovery needed. According to Mr. Levy, Jamaica's standards are different, and so the industry is far more stable.
In Puerto Rico, when they had Maria in 2017, the requirements for Puerto Rico were that the insurance companies had to be able to survive a 1 in 100 year event. For us, that's 1 in 250 years. In other words, a much more severe event by 2.5 times. So I'm very confident that with the standards that the FSC imposes on the industry here, what happened in those territories is not going to happen here. We are more than adequately capitalized and reinsured to cover any imaginable event.
Herman Green.
In a bid to prevent the extinction of conch in Jamaican waters, the Agriculture Ministry has implemented a ban on conch fishing. But Audley Shaw, who has ministerial responsibility for the industry, says he will be seeking to take the measure further. He says he'll be reaching out to the Dominican Republic and Honduras governments for them to assist in preventing their citizens from fishing in Jamaica's waters. Poaching has been a long-standing problem affecting Jamaica's fishing industry, so much so that a decision was made this year to ban conch fishing until January 31, 2020.
In fact, last week, 2 vessels were held out somewhere in the Pedro Bank area that were doing illegal fishing from the Dominican Republic. Our Coast Guard people have held them there. They have those vessels right now.
He also noted that with the ban in place, there is now a need for greater policing of Jamaican waters to deter poachers.
I want to use the opportunity of this interview to send a message to my colleague ministers in the Dominican Republic and Honduras and ask them, please tell their fisher folk to stay away from our Jamaican waters. Fish in your waters, leave ours alone and leave our conch alone.
The ban, which took effect on March 1, is expected to give the depleted conch population time to replenish. Meanwhile, Minister without portfolio in the Agriculture Ministry, J.C. Hutchinson, says he's working to give St. Mary a competitive edge in agriculture by selling idle farmlands to farmers who are serious about producing. He was speaking during a recent tour of a greenhouse in the parish where he stressed that St. Mary's agriculture potential has been overlooked for too long. He explains that 514 acres of idle farmlands are available in the Nonsuch and Unity communities, but he says there have been more requests than available lands. Central St. Mary MP Dr. Morris Guy addressed the farmers.
Right now, it's about those who can invest and produce, turn over profit for themselves, boost the economy of the country, increase the GDP, and at the end of the day, Jamaica can say comfortably, we don't have to import so much foodstuff from abroad.
Mr. Hutchinson says the lands will be distributed by the Rural Agricultural Development Authority, RADA, after interviews with registered farmers. Meanwhile, he encouraged farmers to get into groups as, among other things, they can get inputs cheaper.
And when you are cultivating your, call it 100 pounds, 500 pounds of carrot or Irish potato or onion or cabbage or pumpkin, no truck man is going to come to you alone and collect that. But when you come together as a group and say, I have a truckload of pumpkin, the truck man will send his truck there to market it for you.
He says the lands at Nonsuch are currently ready to be distributed, while he hopes the sign-off for the Unity property within the next 2 or 3 weeks, following discussions with the Housing Ministry, which owns the lands. Justice Minister Delroy Chuck has acknowledged that there are areas in the plea bargaining system which still need improvement. He explained the specific points of concern during this week's sitting of Parliament's Standing Finance Committee. Plea bargaining is aimed at obtaining guilty pleas from accused persons so that their cases proceed through the system and do not add to the backlog in the courts. The incentives for guilty pleas include reduced sentences based on recommendations from defense attorneys and prosecutors in some instances. But Mr. Chuck explained that while persons have made use of the provisions, there are challenges.
The truth of the matter is that when I speak to the DPP and the Chief Justice, it is coming well, not as good as we would like. In other words, quite a number of persons are pleading guilty, but where the Chief Justice and the judges are having a little problem is that indicating that sometimes the prosecution and the defense counsel agree on a sentence and the judges are having headaches whether to adopt the sentence that they have agreed on.
With nowhere else to turn, 23-year-old Kerry-Ann Angus is seeking assistance from the public to raise funds to purchase a pacemaker for her mother, who is currently a patient at the University Hospital of the West Indies. 58-year-old Carmen Williams is suffering from a heart disease and needs the electronic device urgently. The device cost $5,000 US. Ms. Angus says everything went downhill in November 2017 when her mother got a massive heart attack.
Every month, because her heart rate would drop low, so she would need oxygen and so on, and she would get really weak and tired. And we have other fees like hospital fees and so on, and other tests. Alright, she need a test that I'm not sure of the exact name for it, and she needs blood.
Those who wish to assist Carmen Williams may contact Kerry-Ann Angus at 876-276-0994. Back on the election scene, ahead of the East Portland by-election, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, ECJ, has issued a reminder for candidates to declare their sources of funding. The issue was discussed on TVJ's Smile Jamaica program this morning. More in this report.
All eyes have been on the hotly contested seat of East Portland since the murder of the sitting Member of Parliament, Dr. Linvale Bloomfield, in early February. The People's National Party are convinced their candidate, Damien Crawford, can retain the seat for the party, while the ruling Jamaica Labour Party is confident about its candidate, Anne-Marie Vaz. As by-election activities heat up, a reminder from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, ECJ, that both candidates must declare any funds received during their campaigning. The ECJ's Registrar of Political Parties, LaFrawn Thompson, was on TVJ's Smile Jamaica this morning.
The Representation of the People Act, Amendment Act of 2016, makes it mandatory that election campaign expenses be reported. It is that the law intends to give regulation to campaign financing and also to monitor what are the sources of funding going into election campaign.
Contributions can be accepted from persons, companies, other entities, or members of the diaspora. The candidates must not collect any anonymous contribution or any funds exceeding $1.5 million. The political party can only accept the maximum of $31.5 million.
The candidate is responsible for submitting these declarations within 6 weeks of an election, and declarations are to be supplemented with the vouchers or receipts that he would have gained from contributors. Where a contributor does not provide a voucher or an invoice, then a candidate is expected to issue a statement of receipt for any value that he would have gained during a campaign period.
Okay.
For contributions of $250,000 or more, what is to be issued is a receipt of contribution.
Director of Legal Affairs, Colleen Wallen, explained what this means for the PNP's candidate, Damien Crawford, who is using a GoFundMe account for his campaign.
If he doesn't get more than $250,000 from a contributor.
Jamaican?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no need for a declaration. So there's a cap.
Okay.
So any contributor who makes $250,000 or more, they are required to make a declaration.
That should be good. All right.
O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
We go on to sports as the Jamaica Scorpions at Sports Time are reeling 41-5 against the Barbados Pride at the Sabina Park in their regional 4-day encounter. Sent into bat, the hosts have so far lost Kenar Lewis for 6, Garth Garvey 1, Brandon King for a duck, Jermaine Blackwood 5, and Assad Fudadin 1. Jamaican Marquina Mindley has done the damage for the Barbados Pride with 3 for 12 so far. The Jamaican-based franchise made 4 changes with Jerome Taylor, Garth Garvey, Nkrumah Bonner and Derval Green replacing Orain Williams, Reynard Leverage, Gordon Bryan and Alwyn Williams. The Scorpions are looking for revenge as their first loss of the competition came against the Barbados Pride, who won by 41 runs after bowling out the Scorpions for 65 runs. Now, with only 3 wins from 8 games, Jamaica are currently at the foot of the table on 82.4 points, 3.1 behind the Trinidad and Tobago Red Force, who take on leaders and reigning champions, Guyana Jaguars in Providence. And that wraps up the Midday News. I'm Herman Green. Please join us at 7 for the Primetime News Package. On behalf of the news, sports and production teams, good afternoon.